After studying this module, you shall be able to know the basic idea about what is qualitative data and what are the various sources of data analysis. Differentiate between quantitative and qualitative data analysis, and also learn the in-depth process of data analysis in qualitative research. Analysis of qualitative data, Part 1. There are two main parts in this module. Part 1, Introduction to Analysis of Qualitative Data. This section outlines the process of data analysis in qualitative research, beginning with the basic introduction of qualitative data and what are various sources of qualitative data. It goes on to explain the difference between qualitative and quantitative data analysis. Lastly, it gives brief outline of the qualitative data analysis process. Part 2 talks about data analysis process in detail. Here, we present in-depth process of data analysis in qualitative research. Now, Part 1, Introduction to Analysis of Qualitative Data. What is qualitative data? Qualitative data consists of words and observations, not numbers. It is the data that approximates or characterizes but does not measure the attributes, characteristics and properties, etc. of a thing or a phenomena. In other words, qualitative data is text-based data which cannot be subjected to mathematical manipulations. For example, the data obtained through diary accounts, open-ended questionnaires, unstructured interviews and unstructured observations. Qualitative data is typically descriptive in nature and as such is harder to analyze than quantitative data. As with all the data, analysis and interpretations are required to bring order and understanding. This requires creativity, discipline and a systematic approach. There is no single or best way for analyzing qualitative data. The process of qualitative research depends on the question the researcher wants to answer, the need of the ones who will use the information and the researcher resources. Now, sources of qualitative data. Qualitative data comes in many forms and from a variety of sources. Some of the sources are mentioned by Ellen Taylor, Powell and Marcus Renner 2003 are as follows. Open-ended questions and written comments on questionnaires may generate single words, brief phrases or full paragraph of text. Testimonials may give reactions to a program in few words or lengthy comments either in person or in written correspondence. Individual interviews. They can produce data in the form of notes, summary of the individual's interview or word-to-word transcripts, discussion group or focus group interviews. They often involve full transcripts and notes from a moderator or an observer. Logs, journals and diaries. They might provide structured entries or free-flowing text that you or other produce. Observations. These might be recorded in your field notes or descriptive accounts as a result of watching and listening. Documents, reports and news articles or any other published written material which may serve as a evaluation data. Stories may provide data from personal accounts of experiences and results of program in people's own word. Case studies typically include several of above. Now, what is data analysis in qualitative research? Data analysis in qualitative research is a complex process of making meaning from the data. It involves the researcher moving to and fro between the concrete bits of data and abstract concepts. It involves inductive and deductive reasoning as well as moving back and forth between description and interpretation. Carrying out this process successfully is more likely if the analysts review a basic guidelines while writing the process of analyzing qualitative data. First, know yourself, your biases and preconceptions. Know your questions. Seek creative abundance, consult others, and keep looking for alternative interpretations. Be flexible, exhaust the data, try to account for all the data in the text, then publicly acknowledge the unexplained and remember the next principle. Celebrate anomalies. They are the windows to insight. Get critical feedback. The solo analyst is a great danger to self and others. Be explicit. Share the details with yourself, your team members, and your audience. Now, qualitative versus quantitative data analysis. Qualitative data analysis greatly differs quantitative data analysis. Firstly, the difference is based on the orientation of qualitative data analyst. Qualitative data analyst focus is on the in-depth, comprehensive understanding in which the analyst is an active participant as compared to the quantitative data analyst role as a dispassionate investigator of specific relations among discrete variables. In qualitative analysis, the focus of research is on meanings rather than on the quantifiable phenomena. Data collection involves in-depth focus on a few cases rather than less data on many cases. Study in qualitative research is done in depth and in detail without preset categories or directions. Unlike quantitative research, where emphasis is on analysis and categories determined in advance, researcher in qualitative research is conceptualized as an instrument himself rather than as the designer of objective instruments to measure particular variable. The context of the study is of importance and not the idea of generalizing results. It is taken into the consideration that the research might be impacted by the values of the researcher and others involved on the course of analysis, unlike quantitative research where value-free inquiry is of significance. The aim is to provide descriptions in general rather than measuring specific variables. When comparing qualitative data analysis to quantitative data analysis, one should keep in mind features of qualitative data analysis that are shared with those of quantitative data analysis. Both the data analysis can involve making distinction about textual data. You can also know that textual data can be transposed to quantitative data through a process of categorization and counting. Some qualitative analysts also share with the quantitative researchers a positivist goal of describing better the world as it really is, although others have adopted a postmodern goal of trying to understand how different people see and make sense of the world without believing that there is any correct description. Now, data analysis process. Data analysis process in qualitative research is different from quantitative research. It involves naturalistic, textual or verbal reports rather than plain numbers. Hence, data analysis involves interpretation of what these textual data means or implies. There are several methods of qualitative data analysis like thematic, content analysis, grounded theory analysis, discourse analysis, conversation analysis, interpretative analysis, phenomenological analysis, and narrative analysis. Detailed narrative reports of the participants' perceptions, insights of the researcher, and understanding about the phenomena are used to present the interpretation of these qualitative data analysis. Visual representation of data may be possible like through maps, diagrams, or photographs. In this section, we will discuss the process of data analysis in qualitative research in brief. The process is as follows. Data collection and documentation is the first step. Then data categorization into concepts. Then pattern and connections within and between the categories. The next comes to data interpretation and final representation of the data. Part 2. Data analysis process in details. Data collection and documentation. Analysis of qualitative data generally include reconstruction of the original comments, observations and feelings from the notes drawn in the field or during an interview or transcription of the text from audio tapes. This leads to generation of ample of data. An inexperienced researcher in such a situation might become overwhelmed by the quantity of information collected, which may cause obstruction in proceeding further with the data. Many field research projects have been slowed to a halt due to this. And 1 hour interview can generate 20 to 25 pages of single-spaced text. A disciplined transcription schedule is required for making the analysis easier. The analysis can be seen emerging from this simple process of taking notes in the following example. Usually, I wrote these notes immediately after spending time in a setting or the next day. Through the exercise of writing up my field notes with attention to who the speakers and the actors were, I became aware of the nature of certain social relationships and their positional arrangement within the peer group. Documenting the data is the first and very significant step of the analysis process. Everything that preserves a record of what happened, like various contacts, interviews, written documents, need to be saved and listed. Documentation is critical to qualitative research for several reasons. It is essential for keeping a track of what will be a rapidly growing volume of notes, tapes, and documents. It provides a way of developing and outlining the analytic process. It encourages ongoing conceptualizing and strategizing about the text. Now, data categorization into concept. Next step in qualitative analysis is identification and refining of important concepts. This categorization of information is also known as coding the data or indexing the data. However, it does not involve assigning numerical codes as is done in quantitative analysis. Rather, it involves identification of themes and patterns, ideas, concepts, behaviors, interaction, incidents, terminology or phrases used, and organization of data into coherent categories that summarize and bring meaning to the text. This can be fairly labor intensive depending on the amount of data you have, but this is the crux of the qualitative analysis. It involves reading and rereading the text and identifying coherent categories. Now, third step is pattern and connection within and between the categories. Once the data is organized into meaningful chunks, which is called categories, generally via system of coding, patterns and connections within and between the categories are established. It is these connections that are used in interpretation of the data. These relationships that emerge from the categorization of the data develop a framework for understanding the data. The following section describes several tools that have enabled qualitative researchers to think about their data in ways and that permit reasonable interpretation. First is creating hierarchical category system. Sometimes codes or categories can be organized into different levels or hierarchies. For example, the category of birds has many types of falling categories. For example, sparrows, pigeons, parrots, etc. The idea is that some ideas or themes are more general than others, and thus the codes are related vertically. Second is typologies, also called taxonomies, are an example of Spradley's strict inclusion type of relationship. Patterns example is interesting because it demonstrates a strategy that you can use to relate separate dimensions found in your data. Patton first developed two separate dimensions or continuum or typologies in his data. First is teachers' belief about how much responsibility they should take, and second is teachers' view about effective intervention strategies. Third, networks. To demonstrate connections in a process that occurs over time, qualitative researchers usually use organizational system called networks. For example, let's presume that a qualitative researcher was interested in studying the phenomena of high school dropout, presumed to be a process that occurs over time. There are many sources of data that might be collected, including students' background, psychological characteristics such as socioeconomic status and attitudes that reflect perseverance. These networks can be visually displayed by the diagrams. By this process of drawing diagrams, we show how something works or clarify the relationship between the parts of a whole. It's especially helpful for visually oriented learners. Next is data interpretation. Data interpretation forms a very significant part of the analytical process, which involves coding strategies, the process of breaking down interviews, observations, and other forms of appropriate data into meaningful chunks, which are labeled to generate concepts. These concepts are first clustered into descriptive categories and then re-evaluated for their interrelationships. Finally, after a series of analytical steps, they are gradually incorporated into a higher order categories or one underlying core categories, which suggest an emergent theory. Each of these stages introduces dilemma of interpretation. Researchers get sidetracked by the details and rich description in the data, to avoid which it is necessary to use themes and connections to explain the finding. One can start by developing a list of important findings one discovered as a result of sorting the data. It would help in maintain the record and avoid the problems associated with ample amounts of meaningless data. Researchers should also submuse participants' feedback and peer review during interpretation. It should promote validity in qualitative research. Final representation of the account. Developing an outline of the research for writing the final report forms the last but very significant step of the qualitative research. It is to be noted that the length and the format of the report will be according to the target audience. It is generally advised to include quotes or descriptive examples. It not just illustrate the point that but also bring the data to life. A visual display might help communicate the findings. Diagrams can be used. They are helpful in displaying all the pieces fit together and may reveal gaps in your investigation and connections that remain unclear. These may be areas where you suggest further investigation. Another important aspect of representing the account is honesty and information. When the researcher describes honestly about his interaction with the subjects in the field, what problems he or she encountered, how these problems were or were not resolved, it results in stronger and more reliable conclusion. This honest trail of the development of evidence enables others to evaluate the finding, thus reflecting the interpretive philosophy that guides many qualitative researchers. Such an account has its importance ingrained in multiple reasons. First and foremost, the nature of field research is evolving and variable. Secondly, to an important extent, the researcher developed the method in the relation to the particular investigation rather than applying already specified standard procedure. A qualitative researcher's conclusion should also be assessed by his or her ability to provide a credible explanation for some aspect of social life. That explanation should capture group's member tacit knowledge of the social process that were observed, not just their verbal and statements about these processes. Thus, the final representation of the account should be honest, informative, credible, and summative of the entire process of analysis. Now, summary. Qualitative data consists of words and observations that could come from various sources, and its analysis is a complex process that involves moving back and forth between concrete bits of data and abstract concepts. Qualitative data analysis is quite different from quantitative analysis in terms of its focus on meaning and sensitivity to the context. Data analysis process consists of 5 major steps as have been explained in details, involving documenting the data, categorizing data, identifying relationship between these categories, interpreting it and representing the account.